For the most part, self-storage operators would charge based on space. What we ended up thinking about was, you know what? People will generally pay for convenience. So we basically introduced two prices that are higher than what they would have otherwise had available.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Decision Intelligence Lab podcast. I'm Vijay Mehrotra, and along with my co-host Michael Watson from Northwestern University, I'm thrilled to welcome Warren Lieberman as our guest for today's episode. I've known Warren since sometime in the dark ages of the last century. He holds a PhD in operations research from Yale and has worked at pioneering kind of OR and analytics organizations, most notably American Airlines Decision Technologies and Decision Focus Incorporated. In 1999, he founded Veritec Solutions and has been their leader and CEO ever since. The company's grown steadily for more than 2 decades and has really over time evolved from a consulting firm to a SaaS company. Veritec Solutions are in the revenue optimization space, and today we're going to talk with Warren quite a bit about revenue optimization in an industry that most of you have never thought of, the self-storage industry. So welcome, Warren, and Mike, let me throw it over to you.
All right,
Thank you.
welcome, Warren. Appreciate you joining. Why don't you start off by just telling us what drew you to optimization and analytics in the first place? What got you in this field?
Oh, wow. Well, in order to really understand that, you have to go back to high school, which is a few years ago for me. But when I began high school, which was probably about 1969 or so, gosh, um, my high school had an IBM 1620. And for those of you who may remember, that was the first generation solid state computer. They no longer vacuum tubes. And I was interested in math. I was interested in computer science at that time. And I began my, if you will, my path in the computer science area with learning that and then writing a basketball simulation program. And in fact, that was when the Knicks and the Lakers were at the top of their game. And suffice it to say that I ended up writing a program that was too large for the computer to handle it. I had to go down to the local college, Hunter College, I think, to try to load some of the subroutines and see if they were working. That led to college, a focus on computer science with math. That led me to an interest in urban problem solving. And so the first element of optimization that I was actually interested in was in traffic flow. And I ended up at Yale in an operations research program, not even realizing what operations research was, by the way. I had actually applied to computer science departments. Without going through all the detail, I ended up in operations research. I ended up about finding out a lot about optimization. That led me to ultimately getting my first job with American Airlines in their operations research group, which was a group of 15 people. And revenue management was just beginning with airline deregulation. And that was called yield management. At that time, most of the folks who were interested in optimization were interested in physical optimization, inventories, scheduling, airplane scheduling, crew scheduling. And the field was more or less wide open for pricing. And I ended up, when you talk about better to be lucky than smart sometimes, I ended up working with the guy, his name was Barry Smith, probably knew more about airline revenue management than anybody else in the world. And I was able to just learn from this guy an enormous amount. And then what differentiated me from everyone else in this field was I had an interest in thinking about how to take these concepts into different industries. And everybody else, typically you learn something, you learn an industry, you drill deep into that industry, you stay in an industry. There were very few people that like to work across multiple industries. And so I would tell you that in the early 1990s, I actually had more experience than anybody else in the world in revenue management optimization. And that's just a function of the number of people that in the discipline at that time was relatively small.
Wow, a
So
second shout out to Barry Smith on the podcast. Doug Gray also mentioned him, your old colleague from American Airlines.
nice. Yeah, yeah. I owe Barry a lot. And hopefully he'll see this podcast and know that I really mean it. But you know, we when I was at American, we began doing work for other companies, consulting, not just American Airlines. The first project we took on was for Amtrak to develop a revenue management system for them. And Barry was the lead on that, and he asked me to be the lead analyst on that project. And that kind of began my career in revenue management across different industries. After Amtrak, I did work with Royal Caribbean Cruise Line. And so it just kept growing. I think at one point I looked at my experience and it spans like 3 dozen industries.
So Warren, on that, like just a little bit about the American Airlines. Did you guys know at the time you were onto something really big? Like, did that group just have some vibe to it that felt like, yes, this is going to really change this whole industry, or was it just, or how was it? How was that experience?
Uh, I would say that we were so well aware of the revenue, the financial impact of it, that when the CEO of US Airways, I think it was Ed Kolodny at the time, made a comment about revenue management just being a fad, we had a little internal discussion and we said, US Airways days are numbered because they don't fully understand how important this is for overbooking, for discount control. So we absolutely fully understood that this was, in our view, really important to eking out a lot of extra revenue, which was important for airline financial success.
It is sort of important, though, sort of for us to recognize that context. So, Warren, you mentioned deregulation earlier. And we going from an America that had kind of dominant positions in a lot of things in a highly structured and regulated environment to sort of assure that dominance to a much more competitive world,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Kind of late 70s, early 80s. And at the same time that technology was exploding.
yeah. And that's why Pan Am doesn't exist anymore today. Pan Am thrived in a regulated world. They did not respond well to the deregulation. Bob Crandall was the CEO of American at that time. He was as sharp as they come, and he was ruthless in terms of his desire to compete and win. And revenue management became one of the primary vehicles at American. And again, it wasn't by itself, but it became one of the important tools at American's disposal to be financially more successful than other airlines at that time. Yep.
Well, so Warren, I got two back-to-back questions a bit that are directly connected to one another. The first is, tell us about Veritec and how Veritec started. And then
Mhm.
the follow-up question to that, just to get you primed, is we all kind of understand revenue management and airlines, but almost none of us understand it in self-storage. So how did Veritec get started, and how did Veritec get started in self-storage are my two
Okay.
questions.
All right. So the way Veritech gets started, to start with that, is in the late 1990s. I was working for a consulting company. And if you remember, at that time, a lot of companies were going public. Companies that specialized in bespoke or custom software don't get a very large multiple on their share price. You have to have recurring revenues. And so the company that I was working for at that time was beginning to switch from custom software development to product software. And, you know, arguably I was in my, let's call it, early 40s at that time. I had a strong intellectual interest in developing new revenue management models and techniques in different industries. I was not particularly interested in developing a product and then reselling it to other companies. It just wasn't what I was interested intellectually. Okay. And we'll come back to this later because
There-
it's kind of
there's
useful
there's
with
an irony
Veritec.
there's an irony there that I see
Well,
coming.
there's an irony, but there is also a difference in what we do, and which is going to be very important when we get to Veritec. Um, so, without going through all the details, I ended up deciding that, you know what, the company that I was with was no longer the right place for me. That it wasn't going to really use what I was best at, was I was interested in, and I got convinced to start Veritech, and a few other people were willing to join me when we did. At that point, I was beginning to develop enough of a reputation in the revenue management discipline that we thought, you know what, we might be able to attract ourselves, be attractive to new companies for software, even as a new entrant in the field. And that's what led to getting started with Veritech. And so when Veritech began, call it 1999, 2000, all of our work was in the travel industry, airlines, hotels, rental cars. That was where a lot of our expertise was. Um, and then we actually got even some work in self storage from a company that was interested in pioneering some revenue management work. And then if you remember, 9/11 hits. And when 9/11 occurs, the travel industry shuts down. We actually had signed a contract with a rental car company, a couple of $1 million contract with a rental car company about a week or two before 9/11. And I'll never forget this. 9/11 occurs, rental cars, everything shuts down. They call us and say something along the lines of, you can sue us, but we are not going to continue with the contract. Now, we had a fixed price contract. We absolutely had the ability, but you don't make a lot of friends when you sue your clients. And we said, and if you think about it, also at the time of 9/11, the last thing you were really thinking about on your mind was suing a travel company that had to shut
Right.
down because of the horrible events that just transpired, right? And so we took a while to rebuild, um, and we began doing a little work in self-storage in 2000, 2001. Then we continued to do work in aspects of the travel industry and other industries, even primary medical care, over the next decade. So now, as a result of some of the work that we did in 2001 or so in self-storage, I wrote a white paper about what makes self-storage different than the traditional revenue management industries. 10 years later, and I guess, you know what? You can say, thank you, Internet. um, a head of revenue management at one of the larger self-storage company picks up or finds this white paper that I had written, says he reads it and says, this is fascinating. These people really do understand something about our industry, calls us up. This was with a company called Uncle Bob's Self Storage. They have since been purchased. It was Sovereign Self Storage. They invited us in to do some work. We develop a whole new technology. So we kind of look at their data. We come up with an approach that we think is going to work, which is different from what we had been doing 10 years earlier. We come up with some ideas that are even too advanced for what they wanted to do because of the limitations of their reservation system. But it ends up other self-storage companies could support this new idea, which we have now since gotten a patent on, by the way. That's how creative and innovative it was. Um, and that sets things in motion for us to do a lot of work in self-storage.
What are like one or two things that make it so different than the traditional airline hotels?
one of the big things that makes it so different is it's a low volume,
Mm.
a low transaction volume industry. Okay. So without going through all the details, and I can do that if you want, but without going through all the details, I would say a lot of the models in the airline and other travel industry were kind of geared towards high transaction volume. And on top of that, if I go back to my days at American Airlines, we knew, for example, that one of the things that would tell us whether our prices were right was conversion rate. We What I mean by that is if you looked at the number of people who were calling in to make a reservation, and then the number of people who actually made a reservation on the flight, that tells you something about how well your price is geared towards the marketplace, right? It's not just about the number of reservations, but it's the conversion or the closing rate.
Right.
But it was too difficult to access and use that information in our models. So we didn't. Okay. However, when we got to self-storage, we thought, you know what? Closing rate information is absolutely something that we could incorporate into our models. And so inquiries or leads, as they call them, and then looking at um, elements of how many move-ins that leads to was all something that became important in our modeling. So we started to develop an entirely new system, which we called multiple signal modeling.
Thinking out loud here, Warren, that at that same time that you were transitioning largely out of the airline and the travel stuff, that world was getting a lot more complicated with online purchase and channel partners, and those models probably had to be revisited quite a bit as well.
That very much so. And I would say that if you remember, we started in 2000 Veritec, there were four of us. Okay. We were a relatively small company. The airline, the hotel, the rental car space, you had several very large revenue management companies, consulting software companies that were focused on those industries. And those industries, for revenue management purposes, were becoming more and more commoditized. And they weren't necessarily a place where our company was going to be a good fit. We did work in those industries, but typically our work might be helping an airline or other company choose which revenue management company to work. Maybe we were providing guidance on that. We did work in the cruise line industry where they selected a larger company to do those systems work, but we were providing consulting guidance on evaluating the models, and we were providing a different role. But as a smaller company, I would say those common industries were no longer the places where we're going to do a lot of system development. It just wasn't the right place to fit anymore. So the world
So
was changing there.
So going back to self-storage, did that industry kind of take off in the last 5 to 10 years? Feels like to me, I've seen a lot of news stories on like entrepreneurs are jumping into that space, and there was just a lot of opportunity lying around to consolidate, to operate better, et cetera. Did you see
Okay.
that?
So in a sense, yes. If you go back now again 25 years, I would say the companies that we began to do work with in 2001, 2002, which again have been acquired, they don't exist anymore. They were beginning to lead the charge for more professional management, more data-driven decision making. Okay. Um, when we did our work in arguably 2011 to 2015, and we developed custom systems for two of the larger systems, when we were doing that, we kind of said to ourselves, this industry is incredibly fragmented. The top five companies at that time probably had less than 5% of the total inventory. And there are only so many companies that really want to spend $1 million or $2 million for a custom revenue management system. So by 2015, after we had done custom systems for two large companies, we then looked at ourselves and said, we've got 95% of the work done for a product. we could develop a product, and if nobody actually buys it, we haven't really lost very much. So we could take the financial risk to develop it. And that's what we did. And we totally underestimated the demand for our type of software.
So, ironically, Warren, as I'm thinking about this, as you who've been a pricing guy for such a long time, part of transitioning into the product business was having to figure out pricing. What was your approach? How did you sort that out?
Okay. So this is interesting. And this basically is kind of a combination. And there's another company in our that has kind of come into the self-storage space, and they have a different philosophy than us in terms of how they charge for their stuff. We initially came into this thinking, we could charge something based on the incremental value that we generate. And for reasons that probably are not worth going into in today's call, that turned out not to be a very good strategy because there was another company that had been generating a lot of animosity in the industry, and that's what they had done. And a lot of operators had a very negative feeling towards this because you have to really be good at being able to estimate the incremental revenue. And is it from revenue management? Is it marketing? Is it just the business development? Is it just the business cycle? So we ended up having to pivot a little bit. And, we basically started with fees that we thought would make sense. And now we monitored the take rate, how much people or companies objected to our rates being too high. And that led us to kind of like generate fee structures that over the couple of years got better and better at really understanding what companies could pay and being able to customize things to the different ownership structures that are in this industry. And there's a lot of different ownership structures there.
I'm glad you mentioned the value pricing because I think software providers get a lot of pressure to say, well, how much do you save? And then you take some percentage of that. And I'm just like you, I just haven't had much luck seeing that. I mean, there's a little bit
Yeah.
built into like a fixed price or something like that, but in
Yeah.
general, it feels like if it just can lead to lawsuits. And this is probably why that other vendor was just in trouble because they thought, the company owed them more money. The company was like, well, some of those savings were really our ideas, not your software's ideas. And I don't know. It seemed messy. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yep. And I would say that, so what we ended up doing, and value pricing is interesting. Let me take a back up for a moment and talk a little bit about this, because this is one of the places where we did something really innovative. Before it was understood, a lot of folks did not think it was very useful. And then as it got implemented, it actually changed the entire way the whole industry is thinking about it. And it has been a dramatic change for the industry. So for the most part, self-storage operators would charge based on space. A 10 by 10 unit, 100 square feet unit. Maybe they would charge different for ground floor and upper floor units. Maybe there would be a few units near the elevator that they would charge a little bit more for, but that led to operational challenges because you had to separate out units into different unit groups, etc. Okay. So what we ended up thinking about was, you know what? People will generally pay for convenience. Again, if I go back to American Airlines, even in the 1980s, we knew people would pay more for an aisle seat than a middle seat. They'd pay more for a window seat. They'd pay more to be up front. But if you think about it, at that time, reservations were generally made through travel agents or on the phone. And if you're going to try to explain to people, you can be in row 10 for this or row 37 for this, or it's just not a practical way of selling inventory. So with the advent of the internet and maps, where people know what an airplane looks like, and they can look at the seats. Now airlines can actually charge more for a window seat or a aisle seat or the front of the plane. So we knew in the industry, people would pay more. Some people would pay more for convenience. And in our second system implementation, we worked with a company, StorageMart, that had a reservation system it was adaptable to value pricing. It had what we call unit level pricing. You can change the price of a specific unit. And we actually introduced this capability where every night we would look at which units in each unit group are most convenient. We would price them higher than what the company would other have charged. So we basically introduced two prices that are higher than what they would have otherwise had available. And based on our experience in other industries, we thought, 20-25% of the people might choose to upgrade. But if we told StorageMart to expect 15%, they would be making so many millions of dollars more that we said there's no need for us to be ultra aggressive on the upgrade rate. If they're going to do it, they're going to do it even with a 15%. So we were conservative in what we told them. They tested it out at a portion of their inventory, at the portion of their stores. They made so much money over the next 2 months from that part of our system that they called the company together. They said, we're changing our priorities. We're going to roll this out now across the industry, across their portfolio. It's easy to implement. And 10 years later, now everybody is talking about it, even companies that don't use our system. There have been knockoff versions of it which don't work well, which is actually now one of our struggles, which is there are companies that are trying to capitalize on the terminology that we introduced, value pricing, but their value pricing knockoffs are not nearly as good as what we do. And now we have to actually help companies understand how what we're doing is maybe potentially much better than what they thought they were doing, which might not necessarily have worked very well.
Right. It's that old saying, right? Like, innovations are first ridiculed, then resisted, and then determined to be common sense and duplicated.
Yep, yep. And I will tell you, it took us 8 years to get our patent because we even had to convince the patent examiner that what we were doing was different and not obvious until you get to it. And eventually, the testimonials and the core systems were not able to hold the data that we needed to have held for implementing this. And eventually he got convinced that, yes, what we were doing was really creative. But Vijay is exactly what you said. Once we describe what we're doing, everyone kind of says, yeah, that's pretty simple. That's pretty obvious. but nobody had seen it before.
So Warren, in a 2019 interview, I heard you talk about three prices is a good number to quote to consumers. And you had some good reasons for that. Like, do you still think that's true, or are the consumers smarter and you can offer them more prices? Has your thinking changed on that over time?
Generally, we're finding 3 prices tends to be very, very good. That said, our system actually supports up to 5. And we find that for flash sales, when you have specific inventory to move, potentially at a discount price to stimulate demand, a 4th and or 5th price can actually be quite useful. So I would say, in general, 3 prices really works well because if you introduce too many prices, you can get paralysis. The customers don't want to make too much information, too many choices, and they won't make a decision. So 3 really works well. And then there are selective uses where a 4th or a 5th price can be
I like that. Like, I think it's really interesting because it suggests, like, the math would come back and say, oh, you should have 15 prices. But there's another hidden constraint, which is human psychology. And it's like, yep, that's a constraint that says we got 3. Like, how do we make the math work for 3 prices?
That's right. And if you look at it again, if you look at, you go to the restaurants and you get a wine list of 150 different bottles. I mean, yes, there are some folks who are going to go towards the top end but for most people, it's just way too much. And they're looking at the bottom 2 or 3 choices and they're choosing from that.
So I want to riff on this. This is really what we're talking about here is around the digestion of the consumer of the output from the pricing and the revenue management system. But I also, and we talk about a little bit about the sophistication of the consumers and how they think. But I also am struck by the fact that self-service or self-storage operators are not staffed with Yale OR PhDs and budding computer scientists. I'm interested in the users of your product within this industry and what you've had to do to make that adoption work and to make that product sticky within that
Yep.
space.
Vijay, you and I have known each other for a long time, so I think I can jokingly tell you that that question is actually far more insightful than you realize.
No,
All right,
I, I'm
it's
I am
good.
right. I am writing a book on the topic, so it is
All
top
right.
of mind for me.
Okay. So so let me just talk a little bit about our company before I get to that. We believe that the more a pricing analyst understands about the reasons for our recommendations, the better they will use the system. They will know when to trust the system, the better they will know when to override the system. And so our philosophy truly is what the software we provide is decision support. If you turn it on full automation, it'll work just fine. But if you, in the hands of the right person, you'll do even better. It really is that the interplay with human expertise. One of the companies that's in our space basically says they want to remove human bias. And we end up agreeing with that, right? You do, but we don't want to remove human expertise. And that's why their system is kind of all automated. It's not designed well for having the user provide additional knowledge. We think that for most companies, that's not the right approach. For some, that's what they want to do. That's fair enough. But ours is in the hands of the right person, you'll do even better. Okay. So when we began to introduce our system, we said the right person is somebody with knowledge of the industry, could be a field person with quantitative aptitude. They have to understand risk taking. They don't need to have a master's in statistics. And God forbid that they have a PhD in statistics. You'll be making even a worse choice. But but they need to understand it. By the way, a quick aside, one of our clients for a while had somebody who was a statistics master's, using our system, believed that he was smarter than the system, and he would often override and move prices in the opposite direction. I will never forget when we got called in by the CEO of that company, and he said, "Warren, we'd like working with you. We think well of you. Frankly, we're disappointed. The system is not, our revenues are not doing well. And we expected more of this in the system with you." And we said, let us take a look. We did the analysis. That's how we learned that their analyst was doing things opposite to what the system recommended. And we told the CEO, we rarely do this. What we'd like to suggest for the next 6 weeks is let the system run on automatic. Just do whatever the system suggests. And they did. Their revenues turned around. And that's how we had a proof of the pudding example of our suggestion on who the right person is to use the system and why was really the right way to do it.
So did that statistics analyst, was that, did he learn from that, or was that a very bad experience and they moved on?
I would say he learned from it, but they learned that he was also not the right person, and they
Mm.
decided to part ways amicably.
Yes.
But they realized very quickly that they needed to do something a little different, and he was not the right person for the job. And
He, he,
and yeah, it's exactly right.
Yep.
yes. He was, as we say, invited to excel elsewhere.
Thank you. Yes, and I'm sure he did. But again, it shows you that our system, because it's got such a wide range of features, is used by companies that are not at all analytically advanced, as well as companies that have very, very advanced analytical groups. And our software has such a wide range of features and capabilities that all of the different types of companies are able to find I'll call it their happy spot. Nobody uses all the features of the system, but all the features are used by
Somebody, yeah. Well,
Right?
so that actually brings us organically to the follow-up question, which is, how do you guys manage your product roadmap to balance off what you need to acquire new customers with the demands and the backlog and requests from existing customers?
Yeah. So this is where I think, again, our company is staffed by an incredibly strong group of software engineers and account managers who have strong backgrounds in operations research and have great communication skills. We do not have anybody who is simply like a product manager whose job is to learn from the client and translate that into somebody. Every one of our account managers that works with clients also contributes to model development. So, because we're kind of, I'll call it experts in pricing, and we have experience in multiple industries, we maintain a list of enhancements. That list is either organically generated through what do we believe might be useful as an enhancement, as well as requests from our clients. And we have periodic meetings to um, evaluate the enhancement list, work with the software engineering group on what to do. But even the software engineering group have their contributions to this list as well, which is why I say they're incredibly strong, because they will see some of the detailed logs about which reports are being used and all sorts of other information inside the system that allow them to kind of identify potential enhancements as well. So as a company, I would describe it as every one of us is involved with thinking through what can we do that enhances the product and makes it even more useful. Um, and if I go back to 2015, 2016, when we were rolling this out, a lot of our focus at that time was on client acquisition. By 2019, it was modified to, yes, we need to continue to acquire new clients, but how do we ensure greater client retention? How do we make sure that we continue to enhance the product so it delivers even more value without charging our clients more, so that we retain our position, if you will, as the leading provider of self-storage revenue management models and software in the industry.
I'll ask one last business question and
Yes.
then we can wrap up. But I was like, speaking of that, like, what was the transition like going from a services company or a services background to building a software? Like, what advice would you give people? I think people tend to think it's a little easier than it actually
Yeah.
is.
So I would say that our lead software engineer who developed the system for SAS Airlines, so again, he's got a long history, 30 plus years of work, you know, he will basically say, our system has far more customizations than any other product that's on the market in any industry. I mean, it's kind of engineered to be a bespoke or custom system, just in terms of how we've enhanced it. So, from our perspective, which is probably not the normal perspective, we've kind of taken our strong interest in custom software and brought that into the system itself, the design of the system and the use of the system. So, what I like to tell our clients is that we believe that the system should conform to the way you want to carry out your business, that you should not have to change your process to meet the way the system works. It puts an enormous strain on our software engineers and even our account managers to kind of keep up with everything that's going on. But we find that that is really the challenge of being able to allow the software to better meet the needs of the folks. And in this industry, which is incredibly fragmented, as I mentioned earlier, and you've got a wide range of companies with very, very different philosophies, very different ownership structures, we have found that that has been the secret to our success in this industry. And because it is not just continuing to tweak things, but we're introducing whole new modules. We just introduced a module for a move-in promotion. There's stuff that we are doing that keeps everyone very focused intellectually in our company on what to do. So one of our guys was worked with me at American Airlines. He was actually the VP at Stolt Nielsen for cargo shipping revenue management and other stuff. We brought him out of retirement because he needed to be intellectually challenged, and he loves it, right?
Perfect.
He's less time on the golf course, but he's doing a lot of great things. And when we developed the name of our company, Veritec, we'd say, where does it come from? Well, Yale's motto is Lux e Veritas, light and truth. And Veritec is a play on truth in technology. And our goal was not to be the biggest revenue management company out there. Our goal was to be simply the best at what we do. And I'll let the marketplace decide whether we've achieved that or how well we've achieved it. But that was our focus. That was if you will, my personal goal was to develop a company, to lead a company that if we have a legacy, it would be when you bring these folks in, they're going to do a great job. You may be taking a chance because they're a small company, but we provide analytical support to Carnival Cruise Line on a retainer. They've got a very large analytics group, but they give us some of their toughest unstructured problems, not just in revenue management, but in other areas. And we love it because it allows us to be continually challenged.
Excellent. I feel like Mike and Warren, we could take this conversation on for another 42 minutes. It's been a delight. Warren, last question we like to ask our guests. What are you stimulated by these days in terms of magazines, podcasts, books? What's caught your attention that you'd like, TV shows, films that you'd like to share with our audience?
I'll go outside of revenue management for a while. And I would say, Netflix and Apple TV, they may get their hits, but some of their series, the Wednesday series, Severance, the Thursday, what was it? The Thursday Murder Club movie. Some of these things are just a delight to be entertained with. And I have, I'm playing, as I told you, hockey 3 nights a week, playing ice hockey. On days that I don't, I'm still getting on the recumbent bike. It's a little easier on the joints, and I do that. And I will say, thank goodness I can take the iPod, stick it there, and an hour later, I realize that I've spent my hour on the bike, and it's over, and I've worked up a good sweat, and thanks to the ability to look at this stuff on the iPad.
Fabulous.
Yeah, well, so I'd just like to say thank you, Warren, for being part of the podcast. We appreciate it, and we look forward to continuing the conversation at some other point.
Very happy to continue the discussion. Thank you so much.
Excellent.
All right.
Thanks, Warren.
Thank you.
Take care.
See you all next time.